During this panel session, we'll be going through and covering what it takes to innovate and start a company, how to secure investment and move through the funding cycles, as well as how to improve your opportunities as a startup and to achieve success. Before we get started, I would like to ask the panelists to first introduce themselves, starting with Nick. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, thanks, Michelle. My name is Nick Kepler, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Silicon Catalyst. We are an incubator of early stage companies, and in particular, we are the only incubator that focuses exclusively on semiconductor hardware startups. ARM is a terrific partner to Silicon Catalyst, and I'm happy to be here today to talk about how we can help your startup succeed.
Okay, perfect. Kumi?
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Yeah, great to be here. So I'm Kumi Thiruchelvam, currently Chief Commercial Officer at MyVoice AI. We're a deep tech voice authentication engine working with the ARM ecosystem, and as Simon alluded to in his keynote, trying to deal with the constraints and the challenges of bringing edge AI platforms into the market. I'm also an independent angel investor, belong to a few groups both in the UK and in Sri Lanka, my native Sri Lanka, and I've had a mixture of both large company and small company businesses.
Thanks, Kumi. Chin, why don't you go next?
Yep, I'm CEO for DSP Concepts, and we help product makers enable sort of voice or playback kind of systems in an accelerated way that abstracts the normal embedded firmware issues. So that's what we do.
Thanks, Chin. Iryna.
Hey everyone, I'm Iryna Liashchuk. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Blynk IoT. What we do at Blynk is back in 2015, we brought the first ever no-code mobile app builder for IoT to market. Since then, signed up a ton of developers, and most recently are focusing on helping literally every business, no matter how small and how limited of a budget, to integrate IoT software into their operations and products.
Thanks, Iryna. And last but not least, Miles, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. So my name is Miles Kirby. I'm the CEO of Deeptech Labs. So we are an accelerator and venture capital fund focused on deep tech companies between seed and Series A. And so we've currently got 10 companies that are coming through our program at the moment, and we run 2 cohorts per year. So I'm very excited to be here today.
Thanks everyone for the kind introduction. So let us just get started and kick off. So Chin and Iryna, first question that we have. So what made you take the jump and establish a startup, and how did you know your ideal product would be a success, especially, when you were starting DSP Concepts, Chin?
Yeah, for us, we have been doing consulting for audio product makers, actually 15 years before we decided to get venture funding. And we saw all the struggles that people have with audio in the embedded space. And so we decided that, we've been keeping our technology to ourselves so that we could do our jobs very quickly. So we decided to make that available. And we have a no code way of implementing audio, which is kind of unheard of. Abstracts from the hardware, which is also unheard of in audio space, because it has to be so optimized, for each processor and every chip.
Okay.
And so we just saw the pain point that everybody struggled with.
Yeah. So it sounds like, because you were doing kind of consulting for a while, you really were able to nail down kind of the pain points and knew that there was demand. Did you see any differences with kind of this process at Blynk, Iryna, or was there any differences in the way that you guys started?
Yeah, I guess my story with Blynk is a bit more unique in the way I got into it. Interestingly, so the company was founded by my husband back in 2014-15. We were both just moved to the US. And at that point, even though I was involved there in Blynk from day one, I also had a full-time job at a successful geolocation company. You can imagine the 2 people at a family, working in an early stage startups, bootstraps can be a challenge. So my full-time journey with Blynk began actually a couple of years later. So it was kind of, I was there in the background being involved but not officially involved. So it was a little bit of a different journey. In terms of how and when we decided this was going to be a success, for us, that was, we did a Kickstarter campaign actually, because, you know, the team, the founding team was a phenomenal team that had this idea that building of apps and IoT should not be this hard. You should not have to write everything from scratch. Developers need it, but there was no actual proof that, you know, are people going to want it? Is there a big market? Are people going to buy it? So we kind of went out and did a Kickstarter campaign to see, is this going to resonate, and do people really want it? So that's what we did, and the feedback was phenomenal. We saw that the enthusiasm is there, that the community wants it, developers love it. So at that point, when we saw the first kind of yes, we're like, okay, this is going to go far and well. And I knew I was going to be there full time. It just was a matter of time and figuring out kind of how we can do it as a family at that point.
Yeah.
And the other factor that made me kind of believe in this was just the founding team. It's the, you know, it's very, very, very passionate and talented developers who are willing to go all the way and make this product kind of best out there. So those two factors were what made it very clear for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, testing the market is so important, and then having the conviction in terms of the founders who are able to kind of like bring that to fruition. So, I mean, you actually touched on a really like interesting point, and with regards to, you know, obviously like raising a family while starting a business at the same time. So, you know, Kumi, I also wanted to ask you, you know, related question to that, right? So we all know that entrepreneurs are time poor. What are your top tips for, you know, juggling and developing an innovative product at the same time and securing investments? And maybe Chin, you could also like jump in and provide some of your insight.
Yeah. So time poor is a very key point, right? So commitment and doing the right things, and by which I mean I'd broadly describe it into three areas. So market, so really have a clear view on the market problem that you're solving, and it may change during the life of a startup and depending the stage you're at, right? But having a really clear view on being able to juggle both developing a product as well as securing and raising what I say is continuous investment. I mean, if an entrepreneur, you never stop, right? As an entrepreneur raising finance, once you start, you're going to continually be doing that and raise finance when you can, when not when you need to. And so mixing that with a clear articulation of an early MVP or a product vision, even if it's pre-revenue, even if you don't get revenue, and particularly in this world of deep tech, I think is also okay. But having that clear market product fit, I think, is really an important juggling tips that people quite often, you know, don't spend enough time on. And then the last broad area I would say is the team, right? Alignment of the team, the founding team, synergies between each other, core strengths and competences. And being always thinking about, well, who do you then bring into the team, and having that organizational vision. So I would broadly split it into those three areas of market, product, and team.
Makes sense. Chin, anything to add on your side?
Yeah, I think any startup entrepreneur would probably agree. I mean, if I wanted an easy job, I would go get a job somewhere. But being an entrepreneur, you're just naturally, it's like your baby. You can't help think about your baby 24/7. But you know, it's knowing how to balance. But if work is fun also, then it doesn't matter, right? There's no break like that. Like, oh, I go to work, it's a drag. Now I go home, I can actually do what I enjoy. But if it's, you know, if you can have that combination, then everything is a fun thing.
Yeah. And I think like Kumi, you actually touched on a very interesting point with regards to, you know, insights to the fundraising process in terms of, you know, continuous investment thought process, as you mentioned. Will you say that, you know, that's kind of like the key insight, you know, to start raising money, or at least talking to investors, like when you don't actually need the money, just to kind of build up their relationship? You know, obviously you are also an angel investor yourself. Any other tips? Would you say that's kind of the key?
I think that's an important point, and I always look to work with founders who are thinking at least 2 rounds ahead. So it's not just a round that you're focusing on now, but looking at least, I mean, if you're an early stage, what are you doing? What are you using the money for seed? How are you going to get to a Series A? What is the revenue hockey stick at Series A? And whether that matters for deep tech or a SaaS platform to really know, if you like, the R&D intensity of a deep tech business versus a regular tech business, if I can call it that. So I think having the vision for multiple financing rounds, I think is always useful.
Yeah. And Miles, as a longtime investor yourself, like what are your thoughts around, some of the insights to the process of securing funding for a startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some entrepreneurs kind of think of this as a little bit of sort of an afterthought and sort of, go sort of a shotgun approach. I think it's really important to understand, who are the right VCs that you want to go after. I think build a relationship is absolutely key. So, I think Kumi's point was absolutely right that, you shouldn't be raising when you need it and you're running out of cash. You should be building a relationship early. You should be talking to the VCs. You should be getting their feedback. What do you like? What do you not like? When would you be ready to invest? What do you need to be able to see? And I think also building a track record with the VC to go in and say, this is what we plan to do. Would you be ready to invest at this stage? What do I need to do? And then get those milestones laid out and then hit those milestones and come back and say, hey, look, I'm ready. And, instead of just trying to sort of go in and build a relationship very quickly, you've got an ongoing relationship. You've proven that you can deliver. So I think, finding the right VCs, ones that you can build, a relationship with over time. And also remember that, this is a very long-term relationship as well. So, the VC will typically be, involved and working with you longer than, I think an average marriage is around 7 years or something, and your VC may be with you longer. So, think of it in that standpoint, right? That this is someone that you're going to be working with on a very regular basis. You need to be aligned. You need to agree on where you're going. And if you want to go for the, for the really big company and the really big win, and they're at the end of their fund and they want to exit in 2 years' time, that's not a good alignment. So, I think it's not just getting the money, it's thinking about the whole process and finding partners who are aligned with you. So that's some of my thoughts.
Makes sense. So now why don't we just kind of flip it around? So as an investor, kind of yourself, like what do you look for like in a startup when you want to invest? What are the top 3 things?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are top things? Well, I mean, so at Deeptech Labs, deep tech is important, right? So we want to make sure that the technology is viable. So we're looking for sort of proof points that, we don't want to invest in a science project. We want to invest in something that is feasible, right? That maybe there's a proof of concept. So you've got some early sort of proof points there. We don't expect to see massive traction, but we'd like to be able to see a big customer who says, this is our problem. If this company can address it, we're really interested. And by the way, we'll expand it, from one market to the next. And you can see there's a large enough market. At the end of the day, a lot of it is down to the CEO who's pitching you, right? So that's typically the first point of contact. And so if you've got a CEO who doesn't well understand his or her business and can't answer your questions, hasn't thought through their strategy, that's an easy no. But if you've got an interesting technology, an interesting market, a strong team, then those are really the things that you start with. And I think the whole process is getting from one meeting to the next. So the first meeting probably won't be with a partner. It'll probably be with an associate or someone. You've got to convince them that you're interesting enough to go to the next level. And so, I think some entrepreneurs end up talking about the technology, which is really important, but may go down completely into the weeds and don't sort of share, look, this is why this is going to be a big business. This is why this is interesting to you. Or end up, as I before, pitching to a company that's looking for, digital marketplaces, and you're doing the next silicon photonics play, right? I mean, it's probably not going to end well. So I think, going through understanding your audience, and really think about the process. So look, at this point, with this associate, I want to get to the meeting with the partner. This is kind of what I need to do. Shows enough, interesting there, big enough opportunity fit with the organization. Get to the next meeting, then you want to expand further, and then also start. Again, it's all about thinking about the process. Start putting the data room together. Start figuring out what you think they want next. Be one step ahead, so that when they say, okay, I want to dive into due diligence, you're ready to go. And the other thing I would say is that, and part of what we do with our companies is we run a demo day at the end of our program. And so one thing that I recommend entrepreneurs do as well is to, think about the process and the timing. So what you don't really want to do is start a process with one VC, get to a term sheet that you're not quite sure is where you want to be, or you're not sure if they're the right VC for you, and realizing it's going to be another month before the next VC or the VC after will get to a point where they can make a commitment or not. So I would think about that process as well, of like, okay, I'm starting now, and maybe I do a kickoff, and maybe I use my board as kind of a foil and say, I'm having a board meeting on the 19th of November. And at that stage, we're going to go from, the 20 VCs we're talking down to the top 5. And then from there, we're going to make a decision and start to manage the process and try and get those term sheets coming in. And, you're not going to be 100% successful, but you can sort of speed things up. And VCs, definitely have a fear of missing out, and and they are sort of priority driven. And so if you convince them you're a great opportunity, and that there's some competition here, and they're going to miss out if they don't respond by this time period, I think that's a great way to try and manage the process and get. Ideally, you've got multiple term sheets at the same time. You can make an informed decision, and that's how you end up getting the best outcome, I think, from fundraising.
Yeah. And Nick, how about you guys at Silicon Catalyst? Like what would you say are like the top 3 things that investors look for?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that Miles said are very relevant. I agree with what he said. As far as the top 3 things, I'd break it down in terms of, consider that the VC is going to be interested as you are in the fact that you've got this really cool differentiated technology, but the VC is also going to care that it can change the world in the sense that it can come in and it can address a specific problem in a really large market. You might be just developing technology because it's cool, but the VC is going to care about what the business prospects are. And we see a lot of entrepreneurs who haven't really thought through where their technology is going to go. They just think it's really cool, so they're developing it. Another issue is, can that technology be turned into a product? Not only can it address a specific market, but can you turn it into a product, and will customers pay enough for that product to make you profitable? So will a customer care enough about what you're doing to pay you more than it costs you to develop and sell the product that you're making? Again, too many entrepreneurs don't think through the fact that they're creating a business when they build a company, and an investor cares about the business prospects of the company, not the technology. And then the third thing, I think, is the team solid, because this is really hard stuff. And if you need a team that can figure out how to do those first 2 things that I mentioned while navigating all the challenges of running a company, and the investor is making an investment in the team and their ability to build a business. So those to me are the top 3 things.
Yeah, I think this ties in really well with kind of what Kumi said earlier as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the stage of the business, by the way, in terms of what an investor is looking for in terms of getting a return, exiting on a future round, or staying, as Miles alluded to, which is all around patient capital. A lot of the deep tech businesses I see are all R&D intensive. So you're going multiple financing rounds and looking for VCs who go with you as a patient capital business, I think is useful. So that also will perhaps identify the kind of fund you want to raise. Absolutely, I'll be looking for founder alignment and vision, complementary skills in terms of founder alignment, and credibility, right? Credibility in your product roadmap, as we talked about earlier, in terms of product market fit, credibility in the commercial traction that you may be promising in investors and what you're able to deliver in the short term. So that's where the credibility, the longer term relationships, where you're trying to bring the same investor along the journey over multiple financing rounds are important.
Yeah. I very much agree with the comments about alignment with the investors and the long-term relationship that you're building. Don't make the mistake of thinking that's an easy thing to go and do. We have several of the startups in our incubator that have spoken to more than 100 investors to try to find the right one. I mean, you don't just go talk to a couple and figure out your match. And take heart in the fact that they don't all have to say yes. You only need a couple to say yes. So get prepared to be rejected, because most of the investors that you talk to are going to reject you, and many will not tell you why, and many won't be particularly pleasant in rejecting you. And just keep pushing through and find the ones that that think the way you do, and try to think like them. Think about the fact they care about your business prospects, not your technology. Tell them a story. It's important that you have a story, and it's got to be a coherent story. It's got to be a complete story, but it's also got to be very concise, because as Miles said, you're going to talk to an associate who's then going to talk to a partner who then has to talk to other partners. They each have to get it enough in one shot to be able to communicate your story to other people. So you want to have it down in a real simple flow. We recommend that an entrepreneur talk about first the problem that exists, the solution they have, and how that solution is applicable to a really large market. and the business they will build with that solution, such that a customer will be able to buy enough to make you profitable. And that whole thing has to hang together. I think another thing that wasn't mentioned here is don't ever get close to running out of money. If you get close to running out of money, you become desperate. And if you become desperate, that's the opposite of getting investors competing because they're afraid of missing out. Now they're, you're desperate. So raise more than you think you need, raise it sooner than you think you need it, and don't sweat what the terms are. Because if everything works out well, the terms aren't going to matter. You're going to be just fine.
Yeah. I want to also switch gears a little bit and ask kind of Chin and Iryna, because we've heard so much in terms of what investors are looking for, and I feel at the core of it, it's very much around the people and the team that you guys have built together. So how do you guys, as entrepreneurs, could you share some advice in terms of building a good team and getting the right people on board? Chin, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. For our particular niche, it's audio, and we look for people who have already experience. And what was lucky for me is the people that came on board and are critical to my team, they all see the same pain points. And so when we say, oh, this is the problem we're solving, it's alignment, right? And it's having that same approach and a vision. It's so important. And without that same vision, you're going to get confused. And so, we have to refine our working partnerships with our team.
Okay. Would you say that a lot of times, having that kind of alignment in terms of vision and thought process is even more important compared to, the technical hard skills in terms of where the people want the business to go?
Yes, I think having the vision and the trust is more important than anything else, because before, as it is, it's hard to do a startup, and then you can implode without even going outside.
Got it. Miles, how about you?
Yeah. No, I was going to say, as far as a team, I've seen quite often, especially technical founders, very focused on hiring people that are like them, that are very strong on the technical side. And then when it comes to commercialization, not being quite sure what to do or who they need to hire. Do I need a salesperson? Do I need a business development person? What skills do I need? And because they may not be as experienced in that space, they're not quite sure how to do that, and so they put it off. And I think that can be a real challenge. And so, a lot of the companies that we work with, we talk about building out the team, making sure that you very carefully think through what are the milestones, what's coming next. If you're at seed, getting towards Series A, what are the milestones you need to meet? What you need to get is that some customer traction. Is it that product to a certain point? And then what team do you need to do that? The other thing I see quite often as well is I often see CTOs who are very technical and a great technical team, but often there's a VP of engineering who's missing, someone to actually get stuff done. So you may have a dreamer technologist who's a CTO, and they're kind of saying, we could do all these wonderful things, and let's do an experiment over here, and how exciting. And then when it comes to helping the customer, well, that's a bit boring. I have to do all this testing, and I have to do regression testing. That's not fun. But you need someone to do that, right? You need someone who's going to kind of make sure that the buses run on time, to make sure the team's happy, that stuff gets done. And so that's something that I think is really important to understand. Do you have someone who is technically strong enough to stand toe-to-toe with the engineers and say, look, this is what we need to get done, but is it done? When's it done? Are we ready? Is this tested? So I think that's crucial. And I think on the business side as well, and it may not be a salesperson, it may be a business development person to start off with, and if you hire the wrong salesperson, you can end up spending a lot of money and not really get anywhere. So, get your board, get your, other people who know what a good business development person looks like to help you in that recruiting, if you're not sure how to do that.
That's where I see the investors that are really good are helpful, because they've gone through many, many more companies than the entrepreneur. And so being able to rely on advice from that is really important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think a well-rounded team that's going to ultimately, this is a play of many parts. And so, for each of these different parts, what do you need? Think about, what's the next milestone? You need to think about a long-term view, but what's the next milestone? What do you need to get there? Do you have the right team? Work with your board, talk to other people, get other insights, figure out what you need, hire those people, and do it. It takes a long time, right, to be able to do that. So if you're kind of getting ready for Series A and you've got 18 months, 12 months of runway, get going now, because you may not get someone on board for another 6, 9, 12 months.
Yeah.
I'm also talking to founders at the moment about the liquidity in the US versus the liquidity in Europe versus South Asia. Several years ago, I worked with institutional funds as opposed to venture capital, and I think understanding the dynamics of the different sources of financing is quite important. Certainly in Europe, with the European Commission and Horizon Europe, there are sources of grant financing that can support dilutive financing. So I always encourage founders to look at non-dilutive sources of innovation financing. Horizon Europe's a 15 billion euro pot, right? And UK is very much part of that, as well as all the member states, as well as doing vehicles that are outside. So having that kind of blended finance thinking, I always encourage in founders and look for in founders.
And if I can add to that, I mean, there's one company that I know specifically where the founder got a lot of grant funding, and they ended up, at post seed with sort of 70% ownership still, and most of the money came from grants, and it was as long as it's aligned with what you're doing, right? You don't want to be sort of going off to the left of something that's off piste. You need to pick, find something, a grant that's going to get you to go the direction you want. But that's a great source of non-dilutive funding, which is fantastic if you can get it. Just takes a bit more overhead to do all the grant filings and understand that. But if you can get it to work, it's a great way to go.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for your insights. I think we only have time for one last question, so I'd like to open it up to kind of everyone. But if you were advising a young company in today's tech sector, what would your top tip be to help them succeed? And Iryna, why don't we start with you? And anybody else, if you guys want to chip in or have other insights, feel free.
I'd say I have two. My number one would be test early and test a lot. And I've learned this from our mistakes, from other companies' mistakes, is you always come in with assumptions into the market. And before you spend months and years figuring out that you were actually wrong, do the easiest thing you can to test it out. Put in marketing material, put an ad out, test the click-through. So there are so many ways to test if your idea or execution is good without actually spending months. So think about that with every new thing you introduce. Like, how do I validate it? How do I validate it early and do it over and over and over again?
And iterate, yeah. For sure.
And number two would be outsource everything that's not your core expertise and differentiation. So if you're not, don't build your backend infrastructure if that's not your core efficiency, at least at this stage. Find a good partner, find a reliable vendor, just do the things that matter to you, that make your business unique and different, and focus on that, and just don't bother to invest into building and developing and whatever that means, the things they're not as core to your specialization, because that's going to defocus your startup and your business. Those would be my two.
Yeah. So for me, is that this is through lessons learned, is conserve cash. And a lot of times tech startups, we think of technology and we just care about product market fit. But actually, you also have to iterate on your go-to-market fit. And before you spend a ton of money on, I got the right product, and let's spend it on salespeople and that's the easiest way to burn your cash. Where you should just as much iterate on the go-to-market, and the business model. Yeah,
just building on that, which I would say top tip is don't ignore the importance of your teacher or anchor client to drive your roadmap, to drive the validity in your product and your business, and make sure you choose your teacher anchor client, not they choose you.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, do you have any other insights?
Yeah, I think you need to talk to customers a lot. You need to understand what they want and whether what you're doing lines up with what they want, and use those conversations to figure out what one thing that you can do better than anybody else. Don't try to do 3 or 4 things. You're small, you're under-resourced, that's not going to work. You're just going to get scattered all over the place. Find the one thing you can do better than anybody else and the customers care about, and then go do it.
Yeah, I agree. Miles, any
Yeah,
final?
so I would say one thing I see a lot of founders do is think that they want to build this fantastic product with all the bells and whistles. I think minimum viable product, work out what's the minimum thing you can do, get started, engage with the customers, get some traction. It's really important. I think it's, continuously think about what the next step, what the next stage is that you want to get to, what do you need to look like there, and work towards that. And don't necessarily think about spend your whole time thinking about ultimately what do I want to be in 10 years time. What do I need to do to get the next phase? What's the next value inflection? Is that getting customers signed up? Is that getting a product out? Is that a minimum viable product? Work to that, get that done, and very much kind of, going from one milestone to the next, you're successful, okay, now you get to go to the next one. And sometimes you end up with companies building the most perfect product ever. The other thing that I think is often companies die with is that they say, we've got the best technology, it's applicable to 27 markets, I'm gonna go after 27 markets. And what happens is you get distracted, they all sound wonderful, but you can't commit to any one of them. I think you need to figure out, are there 1 or 2 markets that are the right ones? You need to do some testing to start off with, but once you narrow it down to 1, 2, 3 markets, really focus on, sales will be different in every one, the value proposition will be different in every market, even if the technology and the product's the same. So figure that out, get that worked out, get that early traction, and then you can expand later.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think we're now at time.